Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. So believe it or not, the first time I ever did my first day using Zoom, I had a lot to figure out. I didn't know how to unmute myself. My camera was mirror imaged, which created a problem because I do a lot of writing. I was writing on paper, and everybody saw mirrored imaged. And also, I was living. You guys saw I was sharing an apartment with the owner of the place, and weird things would accidentally come up in the background. And so a lot of learning to learn. But the first major hurdle was how to actually turn on my mic, and so I remember I couldn't figure it out. Everybody was gesturing at me and all that, and so then I finally figured it out. But I distinctly remember screaming, I got this idea, and then everybody was talking because my mic was off, and I didn't know that. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only time that I tried to talk to somebody and people talked around me. It happens way too much in person. See, at least with Zoom, you can write it down, right? I had another funny experience at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was coping with it by binge eating, unfortunately, right? A lot of people were. I don't drink, I don't use drugs, I don't gamble. My main problem was eating. And one day I was texting my boss about some plans for the pandemic, what we're going to do about these students. I was teaching at Washington Tech, texting my boss about that. And I was eating, if I remember correctly, some kielbasa sausages and some other comfort foods, anyhow. I was texting my boss, and he says, "Oh, I'll call you." And I didn't want him to call because I was eating. I didn't want to use my mouth. I was okay with texting, but when he wanted to call, that was really upsetting. And it put me in a bad mood for that conversation that I had to put my food down. Leave a comment if you've ever had an eating addiction so bad that the idea that somebody wanted to call you instead of texting you bothered you. I'll never forget that moment in my time. That was a big key event on why I got over my eating disorder. I realized how much it was constraining me to the point that I couldn't even take a phone call. But where this gets upsetting is I go to a group setting, a meetup group, or even a meeting at work. There's 5 or more people, and I try to open my mouth, and I can't even get 2 words out before everybody starts talking. And I might be with 5 people for like an hour and barely get 5 words out of my mouth. 5 constructive words that people actually listen to, and they're not. It's not like I'm talking gibberish, right? For example, if I go to a work meeting and all I want to contribute is blah 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 blah, the Peter Dislike Show, and people mute me out of that, that would be understandable, right? But we're talking. I'm going to a meeting at the community college or at the technical college that I was teaching at 5 years ago. And I want to talk about how to interact with a student who might have this kind of issue, or I get this kind of funny answer on a test, what to do, right? Or a student who really has a behavioral kind of problem that we need to address, right? And people literally will mute me out of trying to even say 3 words. They hear the first 3 words and they don't assume there's a problem, and they don't want to listen, because sometimes you don't want to just start in with, "Oh my God, Steve the other day started talking about this really inappropriate subject in my class." You normally don't want to start like that, right? You lead into it, right? "Hey, Steve is doing this, his homeworks will take this. By the way, last Tuesday," and I don't even get to the meat of the issue. People have already interrupted. And where this becomes really sore, and this is exactly why I paid a friend of mine to set me up on a blind date, is because I go to a group and there might be multiple girls that I want to ask out. There might be multiple girls who might want to ask me out. The problem is that I can't get 2 words out of there. And yes, I paid my friend some money to set me up on this blind date. And yes, a lot of times blind dates don't go right? But at least I actually got to introduce myself. I remember thinking when I was introducing myself to this girl, how come I never got this far? And then it dawned on me, because people mute me out before I could get there. I was actually just watching a video about what to do about, or reading a answer on Google Answers on what to do about this, and it suggested that you need to just shout out, "Excuse me, I'm not done." And that doesn't really go well with me. I've had times where, it's kind of sore. Part of the reason I lost my job at that technology startup and a few other jobs, a lot of times I'll bring up an idea, and again, I get interrupted. 2 words and cut off. 3 words and then cut off again. And before I know it, I give up. And eventually the idea will surface somehow, right? Maybe I'll go back to my desk uh, and actually implement it. But somebody else has taken the credit for it because they can speak without being interrupted at a meeting for some reason, right? And that is not an unusual circumstance for me in the office environment. I really thrived when we were working remotely, because when we were working remotely, it was easy to actually put things in writing in an email, right? And I've learned, even when I go to the office, if I have big important ideas, to put them in writing as well, right? And so that's a big soreness of mine. A lot of times complaints play out like that too, right? I need to complain about a colleague. My colleague complains about me, and I don't get a chance to defend myself because I get interrupted, and then I give up, and then I swallow the blame because it's easier than to try to interrupt. And so it's unfortunate. I'm gonna have to think hard about what to do about this. I'm not kidding. I had gone to a meetup group that was 5 of us. It lasted, I want to say, 2 hours almost, and I could probably count on 2 hands how many words I got to say. In fact, during the meetup, this was right after Trump had won the election. The other 4 people were talking about how they would be affected by tariffs. You know, some of them worked at one of them worked at a department store that sells a lot of Chinese crap, and she was worried about her job. And I wanted to say, I wanted to just say that, I work with a lot of art that comes from China. I couldn't even get the word art into the conversation, and my voice just got completely overruled. And that's why I didn't feel very hurt having to pay money to get a friend to set me up on a blind date, because for once I actually got to speak, and that was beautiful. If I paid $1,000 just to say 2 sentences and be listened to, I'd be totally fine with that, because not too often do I get to do that, and it only happens when I go one on one. So the blind date is the best way to do that, right? It's a little bit expensive, but it's one way to actually achieve that. And not every blind date's going to turn into a relationship, but if I can't even get 2 words out there, the probability of getting any relationship is 0, right? So pick your poison, right? I guess. So, all right, something I need to work on. This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.